Welcome to D&D Out Loud with Ben Riggs. Episode 81. I am the Experimental Weapons Division.
Welcome to D&D Out Loud with Ben Riggs. I am Ben Riggs, the apparently controversial D&D historian and author of Slaying the Dragon, A Secret History of Dungeons & Dragons. And over the past 13 years of writing and podcasting, I have met hundreds of creative geniuses in and around the world of tabletop role-playing games. Here on this show, I asked two of these flaming torches of the human imagination to come on and have a fascinating discussion, which I then record and send out into the world. Some people play games. Some people publish games. And then there are people who change how the industry works. And Mark Diaz Truman is one of the architects of the modern tabletop renaissance. Designer, publisher, organizer, and strategic mastermind behind Magpie Games. One of the forces that helped bring Powered by the Apocalypse roaring into the mainstream. From Masks to Avatar Legends and my personal favorite Urban Shadows 1st and 2nd edition. Mark doesn't just build games, he builds movements, communities, and launchpads for new voices. We are living in a future Mark helped to chart. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you. I don't know if that's praise or damnation, because what we live in is the awful current now. But thank you. We've been doing this for a long time.
I don't blame you for politics. Tabletop role-playing games seem to be in a much brighter place than a lot of other things in the world. That's your domain.
It's true. It is funny to get old enough and be around long enough that you think to yourself, "Oh no, I'm being disrupted." Is a unique space to be in.
Well, thanks, Mark. And also joining us is Jay Dragon. Jay is a creative force. I am over the moon to have her back because our last conversation was absolutely one of my favorites. Jay's the mind behind Wanderhome and Yazeba's Bed and Breakfast, games that blend gentle heartbreak with radical imagination. She is currently the head of design at Steve Jackson Games, and I am going to keep calling her the pastoral prophet of indie RPGs in the hopes that one day it sticks. Even if you think you've sold out now, it just sounds too good to stop saying it. Thank you very much for being here. The one, the only, Jay Dragon.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here. Once again, I think I'm, these days I feel less pastoral, more prophetic. I'm so glad to be here. I'm so glad to be disrupting Mark. Super glad to be selling out as always. Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. So my first question that I will ask you guys, and Mark and Jay, is a question that I told you about beforehand, and I'm hoping that after this conversation will simply bloom. But here we go. What is a design rule that you used to believe in that you no longer trust at all?
It's a great question. I think the reflecting on your own evolution as a designer is harder than it sounds, because again, we live in the terrible ever-present now of making games, and sort of every game is a reaction to the last one. Like, it was ironically for me, like Urban Shadows was like probably my first real in-depth design project that really challenged me to do something big. And so in response, I wrote Cartel, which is small and punchy and little, and then I came back to Urban Shadows, which was then almost in response to Cartel. So you're constantly in conversation with yourself. But I hope that I vamped enough to give Jason time to think of a good answer. But I will say for my answer, I think, and this is going to sound silly because I'm certainly not the only one who's rejected this, and I think the industry might be rejecting it more and more on a whole. But I think that I used to have a much stronger belief in mechanizing relationships, meaning that I think that there was a time where we saw this failure of the paladin and the rogue to like get along or have some sort of productive conflicts in D&D. And so we thought, oh, what we'll do is we'll mechanize it. We'll like give them a track or something, or we'll give them a score, and it's going to change. And certainly that can work, like that can be productive. But the longer I go on, the more that I am suspicious of substituting genuine, like, interesting fiction with a track or a mechanic or something that's supposed to represent it. So in Cartel, there's very few ways to define your relationships other than to make choices about them. So you might say, I am married to El Narco. And I'm like, great, cool. No track. There's no marriage track that shows you how close you are to divorce. It's just you're married. And everybody either ignores that, which I think is kind of bad faith play at this point, or they engage with it. And if you engage with it and you're married, guess what? Like, you're married. So everything that comes with that is now going to be a part of the game. And that was really eye-opening to see that work over and over and over, that when you give people really juicy fiction, then they're going to go with it. And I don't think that means the other systems don't matter. It's just relationships in particular seem to struggle when you mechanize them.
I think I had a really interesting conversation about just that with Joe Kelly, who is a board game designer, and they wrote Molly House, which is one of my favorite board games the past couple of years. And Joe and I were talking about kind of the design process of Molly House, and they were telling me about how when they were working on the game for a while, they were trying out this kind of like almost like board control thing with, like, buying the friendship with these various people, and they realized, no, this isn't working, because we're trying to, by mechanizing the relationship, it has become transactional, right? That, like, kind of when you make something mechanical, it so easily becomes transactional. And in board games, there's only mechanics, right? There's so, it's like with RPGs, we can just say we're married and go from there. With board games, it's frequently much harder. And so Joe kind of developed this interesting thing where, like, the deck itself represents your desires, and sometimes people will crop up among your desires, and then they'll, like, stay with you for a bit, and then they'll go to a party and leave. And there's a feeling of, like, someone crashing on your couch for a week, but, like, they're not, like, there's not a real defined relationship with them. And I think that kind of works really well for Molly House. But my answer is actually not that far from that, which was I remember when I was first getting into tabletop RPGs, my big bugbear, the thing that I still, and in some ways I still do, like, this is still a piece of advice that when I look at a lot of games, it's one of the first things I look for, which is that a charisma check or is it mind control? Right? Is your game mechanic about modeling and representing the way in which someone relates to someone, or is it about seizing power over them and dictating what they do next, right? I say the charisma check because to me that's kind of the titular, like the example in D&D is the, like, hey, walking up to you, I roll a 20, I guess that means you want to have sex with me, right? Like, which is just, like, horrific, right? If you think about that for, like, less than half a second, it's nauseating. And so I see it all the time with newer designers, especially thoughtless designers. And my bugbear for a while was also, like, I don't even like seeing it done to NPCs. Like, there's a strain for a while of, like, it's cool to, like, you don't want to do this to PCs, but it's cool if there's mechanics that do this to NPCs. Pockets World 2nd Edition had, like, a split between, like, you can, the seduce or manipulate move works this way on PCs and this way on NPCs. I still think to a big degree, I'm like, I don't like game mechanics that coercively define what another character, even a minor side character, is feeling. But I think that I've been really interested a lot lately in the way power acts on people, and that in some ways kind of what power and systems is doing is that it is a form of mind control on someone, right? Where it's like, when you look at, like, for example, structural racism, right? That, like, because of the way racism works, if you show me as a white person, if you show me an image of a person of color and then, like, a gray object, my brain is faster to assume it's a gun than if they show me a white person, right? That there's a subconscious bias that has been ingrained into me through the instrumentalization of power, and that is mind control, and that's a charisma. That's a game mechanic forcing its way into me, and before I can even think about it. And so, like, similarly with gender, right, where Isabel Fall in I sexually identify as an attack helicopter talks about the function of gender as something that is a set of biases that are precognitive. They're effective. They're just like, you see a dress and you think woman, and that happens faster than the conscious mind can process information.
Could you say the name of that book or article again?
Oh, the Isabel Fall. I sexually identify as an attack helicopter. It's a very fantastic, influential work of science fiction, which is now very hard to access because Isabel Fall was chased off the internet. You can read all about that if you ever want to. It's a really sobering way in which our society is really monstrous. But all that said, to tie it back around, I think that there was a time when I was really sensitive to game design dictating what choices people make. And as I've gotten older, I've thought more about how game design, like frequently with game design, what I'm thinking about is power. And therefore, sometimes that means that the game mechanic makes a choice for you because it happens before you have the chance to blink. And maybe the best example of that for me is in 1,000-Year-Old Vampire, where you have a vampire who is moving through the world and you'll be given prompts. And sometimes the prompts are deeply upsetting to learn about, right? You've got this idea of a good person and you've got a vampire who you think is like a decent person. And then boom, first prompt, you just killed your best friend. That's how we're going to start this off. And you're like, okay, cool.
Yeah.
I thought he was a good person. The game has told me I'm wrong. And I need to like deal with all of that. Yeah. And it happened before I could even think, right? My vampire just committed an act of violence precognitively.
Well, that's why the vampire is so useful, right? As a tool within gaming, right? Is we can have immortals. Yeah. We can do time at some length, but if I told you your immortal just kills a dude, you're like, nah, my immortal would never do that. But if I say your vampire just killed your best friend, you're like, okay, sure. I guess. Yeah. There's nothing you could do about it because you understand there's some part of you that's not in control, right? And I think, Jay, you're totally right that like you've actually helped me define something I've thought about for a long time, which is that in Urban Shadows, which does a sort of NPC-PC divide for a different reason having to do with debt, but one of the things you can't do is ever convince somebody with reason. And part of that I've always thought is that in urban politics, reason only goes so far because people are pursuing their goals. Like the vampire who wants to kill you doesn't show up and be like, oh, you're right, you're a good guy, I won't kill you. Like he's committed to killing you when he shows up to kill you. Yeah. But violence, threats, seduction, promises, those are things that would exert power over him and would convince him to do things differently. But one of the things that would not do so is a really good, well-researched essay about you're not going to change his mind. You might change his behavior, right? And I think that's kind of what you're saying a little bit, Jay, is at what point do we think that we're going to alter what an NPC does? At what point do we think we're going to alter what an NPC thinks? Those are two different things.
I completely agree. Yeah. I think there's something so cool about games as game, like, I don't know. I wrote a manifesto a bit ago, the Expressionist Games Manifesto. I think I even mentioned it last time I was on here.
You did. Would you mind summarizing the manifesto in case anyone hasn't read it before?
Yeah, it's I wrote an article saying that I'm really interested right now in games where you have characters who have passionate, inarticulate inner worlds, and then the social structures of reality force them into particular shapes, and they try to express their inner feelings up against the pressures of reality, and that tension between those two things is to me really interesting. And then that kind of back and forth.
And that prompted me to pick up Triangle Agency.
Yeah, Triangle Agency is a fantastic game. It's a really good. There's not a it's a thing where it's like it's a manifesto. It's me trying to say, hey, in the future, I would like to see more of this. I think Triangle Agency was one of the games that really inspired me to call forth. I'd like to see this. I think. And I think like the thing that I'm interested in there with what we're all talking about, Mark, what you're talking about, right, is it's like you've got your character. Your character is they exist kind of in yourself, and there's almost no way to clearly say who they are, right? Like I can never write down in the same way that like with me as a person, I could never fully define myself, right? There's no list of nouns I could give you that would fully articulate me. I'm more complicated than that, or at least I like to think I am. Right. But society applies a pressure that says, no, actually, you're rather simple. You could be abstracted to 2d6 plus stats, and so I go like, oh no, here I am. I want to engage with the world in all of my complicated, multifaceted ways, but the only way I can do that is with these, handful of 2d6 plus stat moves. And so it's like, I want to reason with you, right? Maybe even the vampire wants to be reasoned with, but it's not on the table because that's just not the toolkit that society has given us to communicate with each other. And so there's something really interesting about that, like tension of the desire and the inability, right?
Yeah, it also points forward, I think, like why, again, urban fantasy is such a weird break from fantasy. So, like, if you think about the history of RPGs, Ben, like, I would hope at some point you turn your lens to those days when all of a sudden D&D wasn't the only game in town in a really real way with White Wolf, right? Like that, I'm not sure that has happened another time. Like even Pathfinder is just kind of like, we make the joke, right? The country and we have country and Western, we have D&D and Pathfinder, right? But like Vampire was like, dubstep. Like it's this completely different wavelength in what you're trying to do and accomplish. And one of the core parts of that, I think to your point, Jay, was it presented a society. So it wasn't just whatever society your GM came up with that week or that month or that year. It was, this is how vampires relate to each other. And entering the space means entering a society in which violence has this characteristic and boons have that characteristic. And I think there's something really interesting about a bunch of gamers who suddenly were exposed to like sociological theory in their own play of what would that society be and how much would it arise out of some sort of biological necessity. We drink blood, we're parasites. And how much does it arise out of the people who hold the power and decide to make it that way, right? Because that's what vampires are about.
I've often joked that I've never actually, in all the years I've heard people talk about loving Vampire the Masquerade, I've never heard them once mention a mechanic and why they love it, right? It is solely just this like brilliant web of social relationships,
right? Yeah,
and like Vampire the Masquerade is at its most fun freeform because it is truly just like, let's get in there and think about vampire politics. And then I guess if we need to, we can go find some dice to figure out something for blood sucking. But like the important part is that like there's a way in which we relate to each other. And that is what's interesting. And that is, if we mechanize that, right? Like if we took Vampire Masquerade and we mechanized the relationships, well, now the game kind of isn't about the relationships anymore. You know what I mean? Because like Vince Baker said, game mechanics are answers to questions and games are about questions. And so mechanics are really useful for establishing, right? Like what, and Mark, you know this, but like for the audience, right? Yeah. Mechanics are really useful for establishing, like, this is what the game is this is like the game's answer. You're like, how do I kill someone? And the game is like, roll a d20 and add your strength modifier. And you're like, great. But then you're like, well, now what does it mean to kill someone? And now the game is about what does it mean to kill someone, right? It's not actually about, if you answer that question, if you say, well, here's a heaven or hell track, and every time you kill someone you move up or down that, you go, okay, I know it. Okay, well, what does it mean to go to heaven? Right now you have to ask another question. And so the game ultimately becomes whatever's at the end of those questions. And so like with mechanizing relationships, you can sometimes accidentally box yourself into a weird way where it's like, instead of the game being about the relationship between the paladin and rogue, it becomes about like, what does it mean that we have a history tracker between the paladin and the rogue? Or like with Apocalypse World, which again I love, but I think very famously its HX meter was always very strange to people because that changes the relationship from, the question stops being, what is my relationship with you? And it starts being, well, what does it mean that my relationship just ticked over from +3 to +0,
Well, this also goes, so there's two thoughts that come to mind there. One is in Apillion, which is my partner Marissa's game of baby dragons. It's My Little Pony meets Spyro. There's no real way to do violence. And what's interesting about that is, I think to your point, Jay, it says, well, what do you do about a very dangerous creature? Like you're like, I go to my violence. Oh, wait, I don't have that tool. I don't have a hammer in this toolkit. What else I got? Right. And so you're like, oh, I could go convince an elder dragon to do this. That's interesting. I'm going to go invest in my society and have an older dragon take care of this and pay all the costs that come with engaging that society. Right. The problem, of course, which is true in Sagas of the Icelanders as well, is when you take tools away from people, they sometimes then chafe at the absence of those tools because they can't imagine what it would be like to not have them. And so I think one of our challenges as game designers is like balancing the tools we take away and the tools we give, right? So if we take away too many of your tools, at least you perceive us to have taken away those tools, you're like, fuck this game. Like I'm out, like I don't, whatever. Because you're not getting enough buy-in, right? To like do the things that are supposed to happen.
Well, or you can keep going. You can keep taking away tools that you have Wanderhome, right?
well, if you give people no real tools and ask them to find a way forward, that's the game. right? That's
yeah.
easy. But when you end up with something like sagas where you've got somebody who's like, I'm a woman and I want to take on a physical challenge, and you're like, well, you can't. Or if you do it, I just say what happens is the GM, there's a chafing, like a friction that the first couple times probably is fine, but then eventually turns into a rug burn as you're like, but I keep coming back to this thing and there's no answer for me. And that can be really frustrating. And I think it points to, go ahead.
I was just saying, and Triangle Agency solves this by saying that the game mechanics are themselves in-universe impositions of the job you have. And so when you chafe against, like in Triangle Agency, the only way to, it is assumed, whenever you are in a situation where you could succeed or fail, it's assumed you'll fail. Right? Whenever you're in like a risky, like whenever normally, you'd reach for the dice or you just automatically, it's assumed you'd succeed, like in a lot of PBTA. No, it's assumed you'd fail. And then the only time you do roll dice is if you're using the only time you have a chance of success, basically, is when you're using a special ability, or which is like very specific in its scope, or when you are rewriting history to shape kind of your like constructing a retroactive continuity.
Right.
And at first that seems really like, oh, well, what do you mean I can't do? It's like, oh, how do I make a skill check? And it's like, well, you can't make a skill check. You're stuck in the like it's just assumed you'll fail. But also this is like, because this is what the Triangle Agency has said about you. And so if you're like, well, actually, I think that maybe I should roll dice under other circumstances, it's like the game kind of starts to like buckle and bend. And when it starts buckling and bending, interesting things start happening.
Yeah, I think the idea of giving answers to those questions and having that be the framework that you kind of work within. I think one of the challenges of being a game designer is that you're designing like a jungle gym, right? You're designing the space for people to play, and these are the structures and these are the things. And to some degree, it is legitimate to have a sandbox, like not in the RPG sense, but in the playground sense of here's a bunch of sand, do with it what you will, which is what I kind of see Wanderhome as. It's like there are no structures, build your own, fools. And Wanderhome
is freeform DIY Vampire the Masquerade. Yeah.
Right. But if you have these mechanics, I think one of the things people struggle with is there's a disconnect, what we might call, if we were being really pretentious, the sort of like diegetic disconnect or some sort of ludonarrative dissonance, right? Yes.
Yeah, maybe they have.
Is when you have something like HX and you say, okay, so Jay, your brainer and my driver have just gotten through this incredible experience. We got away from the cannibals. Great. Both of us did really cool things. And now you give me a +1 on my HX and I say I have a 3.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what that means, right? And so you end up in this weird space as a player of trying to make it make sense. And I think that's one of those things that one of the strengths of Dungeons and Dragons, or one of the strengths of the OSR in general, is that there are fewer pieces that don't make sense. Some of that is because people have internalized stuff. Like, why do I miss all the time? Like, what is
XP?
What is XP, right? Those are things people, don't think about it, Morty. Like you're done. Don't think about it too hard, right? But instead, it's that we as game designers have the unfortunate tendency to introduce mechanics that then make people go, well, I don't have the context I need to square the circle here. Even though I want to do it. I want to see it happen. I can't quite get there. And I think sometimes as a designer, you can be frustrated by weaker mechanics that are not as strong, not as interesting, not as dynamic, but that make sense to people because they're weaker, not as strong, not as demanding. And that's a tough space for us to be, I think, as an industry. Is there's an infinite number of games now. Like when I say that, I in 2004, what were you playing? Burning Wheel, Vampire the Masquerade. There's not a lot else out there. And in 2025, if you're like, I want to play a game about a Swedish investigator a la the Snowman, but using OSR rules, you're like, great, that's Cork Borg. Done. Like, you got it. Right? Done. You're set. I got exactly. I want to play a Teen Titans. Well, masks. Done. Right? I want to be animals wandering after a done. Wanderhome. Right? Like, there's so many things.
Well, you also think of that. Yeah. Sorry. I think I do that. I have the talking pattern where I like to start my sentence as someone's finishing their sentence. It's like the crosstalk thing. But I was gonna say I think it's a shift that happened at some point, and I think it's a really interesting one. I don't know how to like quite articulate it, So I don't know my history well enough to know when it happened, but there was like a moment when it went from this is, or like I think maybe we're still in the process of that shift, right? But it went from like I'm looking for a game where I can do X, Y, and Z, and then it's like great, I've got a game that does that. And there's now been kind of a shift towards here is a game that does X, Y, and Z. And then someone goes, oh, I'm interested in X and Y and maybe Z. Let me like, right? It's like it's the difference between someone being like, God, I wish that I could play sci-fi, and it's like, oh, here's Traveler, versus being like, oh, that's Traveler? What is that? Picking it up and then engaging with it. And I think that as the RPG space has grown, I think that the main pivot we've seen is towards that second style of like games are no longer, it's no longer that I'm looking to play a superhero game, a Young Supers game, and I go and I find masks. It's now that I'm looking, I encounter masks and I go, that looks interesting, I want to try it. And then I come in and I buy into masks. And I feel like that's at the very least a shift that I've kind of seen amongst a lot of folks. And also like with Possum Creek, where it's like, we so explicitly make games that are not interested in trying to hit on particular niches, right? We are not sitting there being like, what genres are this? We are sitting there being like, here's a weird thing we made. And so it's like you buy into the weird thing or you go and find a different game, right? We're not trying to tell you, oh, this is the way you can do, like, hey, haven't we all wanted to tell a story about 4 musicians in a train car running away from the devil? Isn't that like one of those classic genres that we all come back to? No, that's weird. Well, here's a game for it, right? That kind of like, you know, like, no, we're just gonna make the thing, and then you'll find your way to it, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's was a weird thing to say, but I wish that was true. I'm not sure that it is, and I think there's a weird thing here going on in the RPG industry where the total number of people has gotten so big. Like, there's no doubt there's probably more games of D&D being played today than at any time in the past, right? I think we all agree about that there's just so much going on that I think there is certainly a large number of people who want to engage, as you're saying, Jay, with whatever the game is, like meet the game where it is, right? So this is Wanderhome, this is Cartel, this is Masks, whatever. You know, they're not necessarily finding their way to something like Cartel the way they would find their way to something like Urban Shadows. Like Urban Shadows is like, I'm looking for an urban fantasy game and I want the mechanics to be a feature of the game. Eventually somebody on some forum is going to be like, have you tried Urban Shadows? But like, you don't end up at Urban Shadows necessarily because you're like, I just really wish there was a way to mechanize debts in a game like that. You don't start with that particular mechanic, right?
Yeah.
So you're coming through this.
So yeah.
Yeah. You're coming through this big funnel of like, I'm interested in superheroes, urban fantasy, whatever. But what I think has also occurred is that the people who were playing 5e 5 years ago have not decided to jump ship to Burning Wheel or Powered by the Apocalypse. Or what they've decided to do is continue that exploration in 5e one step away, right? Meaning with games that tend to represent similar kinds of relationships. So Shadow Dark, Mothership, right? Even things like Mork Borg, where yes, they're very different. I don't mean to diminish their difference from 5e at all. But if you hold Mork Borg and Apillion up and you say, which of these things is more like Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition? The answer is blindingly clear, right? So there's been this weird thing where because there's all these infinite slices adjacent to 5e, I think there's a lot of people who are still maybe never going to go and explore what's out there beyond that sort of initial sphere of stuff, right? And partly it's because they don't want to. Like, they are very happy with it. Like, I don't mean to describe them as sort of like miserable underclass that has just, if only they knew the joy. No, I mean, like, they're playing Mothership and they're having a great time. And why would you leave your great Mothership game and say, man, if only there was a Mexican drug cartel game? But I think that you're right, Jay, that the division in games is in part about whether this game serves some broader interest that people come to the way they come to a Marvel movie. I guess there's a Marvel movie, I'll go see it. Or do they come at it the way they come at Everything Everywhere All at Once, where you say, Michelle Yeoh is awesome, the Daniels are awesome, this plot is awesome, I really hope this awesome thing lives up to my internal feeling about it. And then sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes it does, and it's so joyful when it does.
Yeah. Well, and there's two also thoughts that I have on that, one of which is I posted somewhat recently saying that I don't think Dungeons and Dragons has much to do with what I do. that I kind of view it in my head when I'm thinking about market demographics. I view Dungeons and Dragons fans the way I view board gamers or video gamers or people who post cottagecore images on Instagram, which are like, these are all markets that are adjacent to the market I work in. And I can maybe reach over and cross-pollinate with them. But I view Dungeons & Dragons as a separate market. I think people who enjoy Dungeons & Dragons do not actually necessarily come over to indie RPGs for that much. I don't necessarily think it'll give them the same thing. And I think a big part of that is because a lot of what they're getting out of Dungeons & Dragons is lifestyle, right? It's a lifestyle brand. It's that they get to wear D20 t-shirts and they get to have, Fear the Smiling GM mugs, and they get to kind of, buy the wormwood tables and the special dice and the towers and the minis, and it's a lifestyle brand. It's not what I'm doing at all, and that's fine, right? It's just a different thing.
Wait, aren't we also selling a lifestyle? I thought we were selling a lifestyle brand too, Jay. Like, aren't we also?
Wait, oh no, I have my masks basement.
Well, I mean, yes, of course. Like, there's some level
a special room in my house where I play masks. Well, there's
a hilarious thing here where, like, every 5 years, somebody at Magpie will, like, a marketing person who works for Magpie will be like, "Why don't we sell T-shirts?" And I say, "Sure, yeah, let's try to sell T-shirts. And we'll sell some mask shirts or something, and we'll sell like 3 of them." And they'll be like, "Wow, isn't it weird nobody wanted these shirts?" And I was like, "Yep, sure is, because your experience playing masks, Jay, is not represented by a t-shirts. Like, you can't quite get there, right?" But I do, and I 100% agree that it's hard to walk into a Target and see like a rainbow D&D Pride shirt and not feel like some world has collided in some strange way, that all of these things are now marketable, saleable commodities, right? That's weird for me as a kid who was put into trash cans in the 80s for playing D&D, right? That's a weird shift in 40 years, right? But like, I do wonder sometimes, and I think this is actually a thing for Magpie that's really hard, because we used to be much smaller. We used to have only a few people, and we used to make really weird stuff. And as we grew, I think there's definitely a sense that our ability to make weird stuff and operate at that scale is limited. It's just hard to make a game like a Pillion and fund a company with 12 people, right? Because it's so specific. And I wonder if to some level we are selling a lifestyle brand within those indie spaces. We are selling the next cool thing. We are giving you the thing to talk about at a party. It's not a lifestyle brand in the sense that you're going to get a t-shirt at Target, but it is a lifestyle brand in that there is a way of thinking about it as a lifestyle, and the people who are in it is being very, very, very serious.
I think the secret is that indie RPGs are a lifestyle brand, right? That there's a collective thing that you and I are both selling into, which is why we can both sit here and be so chill, right? Because it's like, aren't you competitors? And it's like, no, we're both selling the same thing, which is we're selling indie RPGs, broadly, right? And people buying indie RPGs helps everyone in the industry, because in a way that us selling Dungeons and Dragons doesn't, right? Because Dungeons and Dragons is a separate thing, but we're out here selling, we're out here contributing to a gestalt lifestyle.
I used to joke all the time that our biggest competitor is actually Netflix, because it's like, would you like to play an RPG tonight or watch something on Netflix? And if the answer is Netflix, then nobody buys any RPGs from anybody ever, right?
Well, thank God that Netflix is dog shit now, and that the pandemic happened, right? Like, I can't imagine sitting there and being like, yeah, I would rather watch Netflix. I'd rather watch Stranger Things season 5. That's how I'd love to spend my game night. No, that sounds horrendous.
Sure, but for you and me, I would say I think there's a lot of people.
Well, I think also.
My ability to get a gaming group together is different than I think, Bob in Kansas City, who has to navigate, everybody having kids and not being, like you said, as committed to the indie RPG lifestyle in the same way. And I think that there's a lot of friction. I mean, I would say, I don't know how you feel, but since the pandemic, I have actually had more trouble getting groups to show up and be consistent. It has been more of a challenge to get people into the space of let's play a game every week for 5 years. It's hard.
Yeah. I think the thing that has become hard is that it's become hard to, like, those in-person groups that I really love and I really miss, those feel like a fight. A lot of the work I've done on 7-Part Pact, like that kind of big elaborate fantasy, is like, it's actually weirdly easier to get a group together for a weekend than it is to get them together weekly, right? That I can make a game that I can say, hey, we're going to play this over the course of 48 hours we're going to rent out an Airbnb, and we're making an event of it, and that is actually much easier to get people to do than to say, hey, commit every Thursday night forever, right? So and that's actually, I don't know. So I've been finding myself like I'm always making the games that I want to be playing, and I'm just kind of trusting that there's going to be people with idiosyncratic and weird tastes that I have. Just, I'll keep doing it until I turn out I'm wrong. And I think like Yazeba's came about because Maisie and I were like, let's make a game that you can play like in 30 minutes with a bunch of campers. And then 7 Part Pack came about because it's like, well, I can get a group of friends of mine together for a weekend retreat much more easily than I can get them to I don't know, do their like to commit to a weekly campaign. That's just impossible.
The 50 session weekly campaign.
Even like a 3 session. I'm like, hey, who wants to come over? I don't ask for 50 sessions anymore. I'm like, let's do 3 shots. Let's do
That's
5
your problem, Jake. You got to
and
ask for 50, and then when they negotiate you down to 3, you're like, okay, fine, I'll take.
That's true. That's true.
I mean, I think there's something interesting. I've talked with Luke Crane about this as somebody who's seen like the like a much wider stance than even me and you, Jay, with the sense of the way that the commercialism of the market has kind of narrowed some of these focuses. Like Cartel is a challenging product. It's its own weird beast. But Apillion, I think, is a game that like Magpie wouldn't make right now, because it's just not quite broad enough. We'd have to find some way to broaden it. And I think
Apillion is definitely, of your catalog, it's the one that makes me the most like,
I know, right?
Magpie wrote this. That's so delightful.
Right, it's so delightful. Exactly. Yeah. Like Marissa, with her love of hobbits and also monsters, wrote this like little hobbit-y game, right? But the point of it is that I think there is an issue when the market forces, which I think are rooted in Kickstarter, but carried through by distribution and by the way people on the internet drive talking about RPGs, kind of pushes us all to a kind of adventure model, a kind of campaign model, a model that is less interested in the different and the weird and the new, because, well, we have to feed people and like run a business and do the things. You want these super fancy books? Guess what? They take a lot of time, energy, and effort to get to your doorstep. And there's a loss of design that's just interesting for design. And I think about this a lot with mega games. Like if you go to a convention and you get into a mega game, it might be great. And if you're not familiar with it, listeners, it's a game that's part LARP, part board game, part RPG. It's got elements where like you might do something like you're playing in a Game of Thrones world, but there's an actual war and you have to turn in your turns every turn, and there's a board and armies move around the board and the deals you come to matter. So it has these LARP elements, but it has these grounded mechanical elements that also grab you and make the choices matter. And people love these things. And I will tell you, I would love to write a great mega game and sell it to who? It's not a saleable item, right? You think you're going to have trouble getting 4 people together for your 3-session game? Try getting 50, right? To like come to an event, right? But like you said, Jay, I think there's this special space for event-based play, right? 8 hours, 10 hours, 2 days in a really special environment is amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think to me, it's like, what do you call? Oh, sorry, my brain completely broke for a second. I think that, and that a big part of that is why I'm very grateful to be at Steve Jackson Games, because I think that Steve Jackson Games gets to, like, everyone knows Munchkin, right? It's Munchkin is very openly the thing that kind of keeps a lot of things going, and like it's a company that's been at it for a really long time. They publish RPGs that are like, GURPS has been really solid. There's a lot of these, they're doing a second edition of Toon. There's a lot of these games that are very kind of like sturdy, have been around for a long time, have like more consistent sales, and then I get to kind of be over here in the experimental weapons division. You know what I mean? And so they get to kind of set me up and be like, all right, build something, right? Just build us something, and if Steve likes it, we're good. And so like, and Steve's an old fellow with an interesting taste, and so it's like I get to kind of build, as long as I think that I'm being mechanically intelligent, which is a good mechanically intelligent and rigorous with my grammar, which are both good things for me to hold myself to. I can kind of have a lot of freedom in terms of making kind of more like stuff that is extremely capital and not for everyone, and kind of know that, like, at the very least right now, like, not everything Possum Creek makes is going to be, we're not pricing everything for like, 7-figure Kickstarter, huge, boom, boom, boom.
Right.
Like we're doing things where it's like, okay, cool. Like we were expecting 40,000 on Last Train to Bremen, and we got 80,000. Amazing. Hooray.
Great.
You know,
Great.
is
Big success.
that part of Steve Jackson Games' budget? No, it's not an enormous part of it. But like, you know, that's still big success. And it's still like, you know, is that game going to be for everyone? No. Is it going to be for a group of sickos who are going to love it? Yes. Can we learn from it and apply it to other games that we make? Will it help us kind of develop also artistically the medium as a whole? Yes. And so that's kind of my goal is like, I want to be like, I think it's important that RPGs has an experimental weapons division, I guess, right? I think it's important that I think there's a lot of indie stuff happening, which is extremely cool, but extremely high variance, and also like the very small indie stuff, and also frequently makes the same mistakes over and over again, right? It's really hard because you can't have a career at it. You don't have the opportunity to get experienced with it. And then you've got the stuff that's really big budget, but once you hit a certain size, the sanctity of your employees becomes more important than the pursuit of like the weird, you know, which is like, it's, you know, I think that's good, right? I think that's like, I think, Mark, if I was in your shoes, I would make the exact same calculation. I would also not want to make a game where I'm like, if this game is bad, then that screws over. I'm gonna have to fire 3 people. I would never risk making a game that's bad. If that was the situation I was in. And so I'm lucky that I'm in a situation where I can say like, okay, I have a little corner of a larger company. It's me, it's the art director, and it's our office manager. And we're going to make things and see how they go. And hopefully people will like them, you know?
Well, I think there's something there around the eternal balance of this, and I think a lot about Slaying the Dragon, Ben, when I think about making decisions as like a business owner, where it's like watching this company, you know, you document this company making these choices that like individually you're like, okay, I see how you got there, buddy, but like overall becomes a sort of tripping over your own feet all the time, right? Like not being like having these successes and not being able to honor them, and instead finding yourself once again having to roll a hard 6 to get through to the next day. And I just think that one of the challenges of all of this is RPGs, even with their explosive, phenomenal, amazing growth, are still a footnote compared to virtually every other part of the gaming industry. Miniatures, collectible card games, real strategy board games, card games, casual card games, which might be bigger than all the rest of them put together once you get into Target and Barnes & Noble, regular RPGs, just D&D and Shadowrun.
Yeah, like it's like goddamn Dungeons and Dragons is the monolith that conquers our industry, and it's Match the Gathering's tiny embryonic,
right? Exactly,
little growth off, right? Like like Dungeons and Dragons is like 1/10 or 1/15 Magic size.
Yeah,
what are we? And it's dominating us. You know, what are we doing?
The meme of you know the tiny fish and the shark, and then the even bigger shark that's coming up behind it, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know, but I think a lot about that stuff, because I think that when you're running a business and you're trying to operate as a publisher, you know, you don't know what's going to be a hit. You really, truly don't. You're walking into Dragonlance. You don't know the Dragonlance is going to be a massive IP for decades. You're just doing the best you can. And then do you have the capacity to recognize what you did? Because I think reading Slaying the Dragon, what I was struck by over and over was that D&D did not seem to know when it had won, and did not seem to know what to do with its victories.
I mean, I think that's very fair. I feel embarrassment when I hear about, you know, like obviously people in role-playing game companies have read my book, but like, you know, I heard about a large company that bought the book for basically everyone in the office, and then they had like a book club about it, and I'm like, I put a lot of work in that book. I'm very proud of it, so I shouldn't feel embarrassed to hear that people are like reading it and taking it seriously. I should be proud, but I'm Polish and Catholic, so
there's nothing you can do. The guilt is part of the delicious soup that is you, Ben.
Yeah.
There's nothing more embarrassing than knowing someone read your book. It's mortifying.
Yeah.
It feels like they saw you with your underwear on.
I would say that, and again, I think this is, I'm stealing a quote from Robin Laws. Tabletop role-playing games are still so new. We're all really figuring it out still. Even the biggest company that is the most successful monetarily is still figuring it out. Like I will comfortably say that I'm sure Wizards of the Coast is still not sure what to do with Dungeons and Dragons. Like they put out D&D 2024. There's been a lot of prattle about, oh, it didn't do that well. I wouldn't surprise me if it didn't do that well, but also like they released it as merchandise instead of book, instead of as a book in a bunch of channels, so that it wouldn't be returnable. But then it's not caught by book scan. So anyway, as far as I know, there's nothing on the release schedule after this Eberron book, which is kind of unusual for a hot selling property at Wizards of the Coast. You'd think they would have something planned.
Right.
But I think that they wanted to make it. It went from being I want to say it was a $25 million gross in 2014 to about 125 in 2020, and the plan was do that again and make it into a $1 billion brand. And that was part of the whole OGL fiasco. It was part of Sigil going south. All their grand plans for make it grow 10 times again didn't come to fruition. And now what do you do? And again, I want to say Dan Ayub is the guy in charge. He sounds like he knows what he's doing. It sounds like he's trying to replicate some of the things that were successful 10 years ago. So that's probably a good thing. But yeah,
I think ultimately you have this problem with anything that's bigger than it is, right? Which is there's a thing with the Marvel universe where you must, if you're sitting in the Marvel writers room right now, right? You're like, man, remember when everything we did was the most important thing that was happening in the culture for a solid 5 to 10 year period. And now through a variety of things that are our fault, not our fault, completely have nothing to do with us, we exist in this mid-tier kind of level of importance. And I think it's sort of the real challenge of doing commercial art. I talk a lot about doing commercial art with people is that like, I'd love to say, Jay, that all we do is just wake up in the morning and go, what crazy shit am I going to make today? Right. But instead it's balancing audiences, our interests, what we think is viable, looking at projects like Airlock, which didn't even work, where we're like, we think this is going to be an awesome thing. And then the market's like, not that interested. You're like, well, learned a lesson. Okay, moving on. And you can't, as a commercial artist, be too precious about any idea, but nor can you give up on having ideas. Because if I just turn in, I don't know, D&D, then everybody's, well, why don't I just play D&D? What is this?
That's the thing always is it's like, I personally, I would rather play D&D than Pathfinder. And the reason for that is because it's like, would I rather run a game that I know pretty well or a game that is like 5 to 10% better maybe, but I don't know as well and would require me to relearn and also has fewer resources for my players? I don't, you know what I mean? It's just like, why would I make that call? And so for me, it's like, actually the thing I want to make is not in conversations on relation with D&D, but actually I think for me, Mark, this is where you and I get to kind of be different because of our different positions and also the fact that like I kind of am I'm kind of in this very weird upstart position right now, and I think that in 10 or 15 years I'm gonna be where you are. I think I'm just kind of like in that weird where I get to be the one who's like, yeah, I'm gonna do something really weird. You know what I mean?
Make it weird.
And I think for me, it's because ultimately I was talking to a college student earlier, like a couple days ago, who was like interviewing me for their class, and they were like, what is for you a sign that you had a successful career? And my answer was, for me, the sign of a successful career would be that I'd be older and everyone would be going, oh, we don't really like care about Wanderhome anymore. It's just everything kind of does Wanderhome, but better, right? Like, why would I play Wanderhome when I could play these 20 other games that like do the thing it tried to do, but better? Because that would mean that I was so successful in my design that I convinced everyone that I was right, and I changed how people, I got Seinfelded. You know what I mean? Like, that's the dream, is to like, and I think that like, there's an interesting thing where it's like, I think that we're in this really interesting phase of RPGs where it's like there is a sense of what the RPG player is, and then a lot of the work I've done over the past 5 years has been to try to really kind of broaden that framework, and it's led to now there's kind of being a sense of like, okay, we've expanded who we think of as being an RPG player, right? The audience of Wanderhome was not RPG fans in 2020, and now we do think of them as a category of RPG fan. And that probably means, and I think that like a similar thing is true that like, you know, I think that if you go back to 2015, you know, I don't know if necessarily, you know, like the idea that PBTA could be like a thing to build a company with 12 people around, right? Like that itself would be very surprising. You know, I think that there's a lot of your games that like have been major successes that like, I think that like it's a good, I think that it's an interesting tightrope, right? Because it's like I'm at the point where I can be bold and daring, and I know eventually I won't be able to, and that's okay. And I think that, you know, that once you've kind of been bold and daring, everyone else catches up with you, and that's also okay. And I think that like in a perfect world, like the things I think are really bold and daring right now, in 20 years, people will think are the safe choice, right? They're just like, oh, well, of course you're making another GM list, you know, token-based economy, right? Like, oh, they're so, you know, whatever, right? Like, that's the safe choice. Like, I would love for the things, I mean, like, Mark, it seems to me like you're in a similar spot where it's like, hey, right, there are a lot of things that Magpie did starting out that were very fucking bold and risky, and the market has shifted such that now people are like, oh, you know, of course it's, you know, you're doing that. But it's like, like that's good, right? It means that like everyone heard you and they listened and they adjusted. They, you know, like you shaped them in that way.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of thinking about it, right? Is the sort of like, what's the joke of Jake Gyllenhaal said something like, you know, you go from being like, get me that guy, Jake, what's his name, to get me a younger Jake Gyllenhaal. Like, you know, like there's a whole arc. It's a good bit. You should look it up. But like, there's a whole bit of it, right? And, you know, there's definitely a thing where, yeah, I mean, a good example of it is that Magpie's doing Masks second edition this year. And it's the 10-year anniversary of Masks next year, right? Like that's been around for 10 years, been supporting that product for 10 years. And there's people who started playing it when they were 20 who are now 30, right? They're in a whole different phase of their life. And what we want to do with the game is not to like alter it in some fundamental way, but to bring it to fruition with the resources we have today that we didn't have 10 years ago, right? And that's kind of like one of those like, we're releasing a greatest hits album. Great. Yes. Let's remaster those cuts. Let's get it all in one album. Let's put some great album cuts. Like, but nobody says, well, we're in the midst of our career with our greatest hits album. Like there's a kind of sunsetting to a greatest hits album that Masks has. Like Masks is going to have a rejuvenation and also a kind of closure at the same time, right? Like it's a weird space to be in until you get to Shadowrun 7th or 8th or 12th or whatever they're on, and it's just you're having to reinvent it, right? But I think that there's something you nailed, Jay, which is that ideally as a creator you find yourself in these different places in your life at different times. And one of the things I say a lot is if I hadn't written Cartel, I would still be writing Cartel. So part of my freedom to go and do other things, to be like, I'm going to work on these licenses, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this thing, is because the part of my soul that was like, I have to write this game or I'm going to die, that part is like, okay, I'm good.
Yes, people love to be like, if you were to write Wanderhome now, what would you do differently? And I'm like, I wouldn't write Wanderhome now. I wrote it. It's done.
It's done.
I've alchemically transformed myself into someone who wrote Wanderhome. It's over. If I hadn't written Wanderhome, I'd still be writing Wanderhome. Like there's absolutely just like my dad is an abstract expressionist painter. And so they do these really kind of like abstract expression, right? These like big kind of like canvases covered in different bright colors, and it's very like flashy. And my dad says like for them, the artistic process is the creation, and then the painting is like an artifact of the fact that they made art, right? So it's like the making of the art is the important part, and the painting is just kind of proof that they did it. And that is, I think, oftentimes how I feel about games, where it's like for me, the game is like the art of the game is the act of designing and playtesting and making. And then it's done, and I have a cool artifact that I can share with my friends. You know what I mean? It's like, you know, it's like you make a thing, and then it's been made, and now it is ready to be shared. But like, you can't share it until it's dead, almost.
Yeah, it is different. I think when you do something like when we did Root or Avatar, I think there we're saying like, hey, there's like a landing pad, and you see the landing pad, and you're like, our job is to take the plane off from here and land over there, and in the air you're gonna find some things, whatever, etc. But going and doing something like Wanderhome or Cartel or even Apillion for Marissa, I think is being like, I'm going into the jungle. I sure hope I make it back, right? And
I've been working on a Wanderhome expansion, and it's the same feeling. It's absolutely the same feeling. And I think maybe I'm not cut out for it. I've been realizing I think I might not be cut out for the landing pad life. I think I might not be any good at that. But
well, I think there is a thing where, especially as you do get a little older as a creator, when I look at the stuff that you've released and talked about with the Pact, like there's much more of a sense of knowing where you're going to start, having a clearer sense of what that might look like to start, and having a different set of goals to go. And I think, again, to think about the history of our industry, I think sometimes I look at, when we think about like the different spaces you're in, right, and how fast those generations change, because ironically, like when I think about Luke Crane is like not even one generation. I think he's two, and then about then Ken and Robin are one more, and then there's Greg Stafford, and so there's like five generations. And I think back to that sense of like, oh my God, like Chaosium is 50 years old, like 50, like Magpie's going to be 15 next year. And I find myself surprisingly moved by it. And to do that 3 more times, or like two and a half more times, cool, you're 50. Like that would be, what would I even,
you know what I think about all the time? So RPGs started in like 1976, right? Like basically, right? Let's say with D&D, there's people who like quibble, but let's say 76, and so 76, that's 50 years old thereabouts. So like RPGs have been around as an art medium for a little bit more than 50 years.
Sure.
I don't know. Ben, you know the numbers better than
I'm not going to be that jerk.
You can tell me the actual number. You can tell me the actual number.
It's fine. I'm not. It was 74.
1974. Fuck.
74.
Whatever.
Close
Still,
enough. Close enough.
That's even better. That's 51 years. 51 years.
51 years.
So, film, right? Film. The first film was made in 1888. That means that in film history, we're at 1939. So, color film, I think
Wizard of Oz.
Yep, Wizard of Oz. Movies of 1939. Yeah, we got. Gone with the Wind just came out. Wizard of Oz just came out. So we just got colored movies, right? The history of RPGs as an art form is that we just invented colored movies phase of its career, right? That is, and so like, think about how like, I don't know, to me at least, like, every single movie I have ever watched, like beyond, with a couple of exceptions, is rooted in that like post 1939. There's a lot of movies in the 50s, the 60s, Tarantino, right? Khrushchev, Soviet School, right? All this fucking incredible movies have come out since then. And like, if you imagine sitting at 1939 and being like, damn, this really is the end of history. We've nailed it. There's, movies are the best they're gonna get with this. We can pack it up.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the truth is that they go back and forth, right? And I think that one of the reasons that I find myself talking about the commercial infrastructure business side of things is I think that one of the worst parts of movies was during the studio era, where they had captured all the actors and they kind of were churning out these films that didn't have a lot of depth to them, but were consistently put in front of audiences at a time that people needed something to talk about. And I think that there's good movies there. I mean, the Thin Man series is a good example. Like, those are delightful movies. They're fantastic. But there's a reason that we spend a lot of time talking about the movies in the 60s and 70s that broke that mold, right? And so there's a constant, I wasn't joking when I said, oh no, I'm being disrupted. It's because there's so much about Jay, what you do that is like, I don't want to say antithetical because that sounds like an opposition, but is so orthogonal to what Magpie does that it just might as well, we're not even playing the same sport, right? And one of the things I had this big long discussion with some folks about what is innovative about OSR adventures, and me trying to get my head around like, why do you guys keep talking about this as a source of innovation? And realizing that the innovation had a lot to do with creating a space where you could play D&D without the sort of burden of D&D, right? Where the adventure becomes workable because they aren't dwarves, they're weird fungus people. And also you've chosen these mechanics to highlight this thing. So you're getting back to some core D&D adventure play experience. And me thinking, I don't want to have anything to do with that. I don't find it interesting at all. And having this sudden flashback to me talking with a guy in Tucson who's a really traditional writer of adventures and stuff, and me explaining how tiered moves work in PBTA, and him saying, I don't want to have anything to do with that at all. It doesn't do anything for me. And how innovation is mostly orthogonal. It's never just it does what I do but better. It's that it does this other thing maybe I don't even want to do. Maybe it's just over there and its own.
There's a great article, by the way, if you're interested in someone actually, I think, very effectively articulating the strengths of the OSR as a medium. There's an article called the OSR Onion, which takes Vincent Baker's model of the onion, applies it to the OSR. I think it's a really good article. Centers the adventure in that way because it's such the that's the that's kind of the thing for them. And yeah, I think to me, I've oftentimes felt about the OSR, and I've said this to my OSR friends with a lot of love. I feel like it's like encountering a group of dwarven silversmiths who only make forks. Like they figured out this art of weaving, moonlight into silver, and they'll only use it to make forks. And
they're such cool forks.
They're the best forks. They're truly. It's a shame that I'm mostly using chopsticks these days, right? If I was doing stuff with forks, I would love this. Unfortunately, I'm just not. They're so good though. They're they got little butterfly knives in them. They can do the dangest things, but it's just not. But also I'm like, hey, do we want to do anything else with it? No, we're doing forks. Another fork. All right, cool.
Let's go. Yep.
I think also about my friend Dwiz wrote an article claiming OSR is folk art Dungeons and Dragons, which I think ties in neatly to my feelings about Dungeons and Dragons as a different thing than what I do. Yep. Because it's the OSR is folk art Dungeons and Dragons. It is DIY punk, underground, non-corporate, label stripped off Dungeons and Dragons. It's the cutting edge of Dungeons and Dragons, and I don't play Dungeons and Dragons.
There's something there. There's something there around going back to the very beginning of what we talked about around. Do games provide a space for you to do what you want to do, right? Which there are many games that do that. I mean, even something like Dominion is a game that sort of just challenges you to do what you want to do with the pieces and the things that you have arrayed, or like Molly House, which is also one of my favorite games. Are you challenged by the game to do what the game wants you to do and have to find in yourself some connection between where you are and what the game wants? What
was the game again?
Molly House, which is published by Whirly Good Games. I mean, another Whirly Good game that I was playing this weekend with my dad, who's 73, so we sometimes play board games together, is John Company, which is the East Indian trading company, the game, which is kind of rough. Like it's by Cole Whirly and Whirly Good Games. And at the beginning of the game, you get divided up all these resources. So some of you have some different roles in the company, or you have different shares, or you have some money or whatever. And I ended up with all three of my roles being military commanders. I didn't really control any of the company. I was just a military family that ran all the military operations of the East Indian Trading Company. And I found myself in this extremely weird position of being like, well, I really want to conquer something. Like it's all I can do. It's the only hammer I have. And so I'm advocating, we need to colonize India faster, guys. We need to get on this, right? And that's the easy part of it is yes, of course, Mark, that's the role you've been given. But then I found myself dealing with all the problems that came with those decisions. Now I don't have any political power. And I had this moment where I was like, oh, I'll just buy into the political system now with all this money I've taken from India. And I was like, oh my God.
The power of system.
Yeah, the power of system, right?
It brings me back also to, there's this phenomenal 2-player card game by Zoe Ardwell called Conviction, which is it's a board game. There's no winners. There's no win state. Instead, what the game is about is you are in a relationship. One of you is a idealist, and one of you is a skeptic or a stalwart, right? So the idealist has a big fanciful dream. The stalwart is pragmatic. They want to focus on the logistics. This is to me, one of the most classic relationship tensions of all time. There's 3 ways the game can end. The game can end with the 2 of you coming to a mutual understanding. It can end with one of you dominating the perspective of the other one, or it can end with you splitting up, right, separating. And none of those are win conditions. None of them are framed as win conditions. They're just 3 different ways the game can end. And so the game says, hey, play this. You can role play. You don't have to. You are going to do this card game, and if you think you found an abusive strategy, you're right. And so the game is, you can identify when you're playing it, oh, if I play this card, if I like neg them out, basically, I can just fill their deck with my perspective and force them to agree with me. And then it's like, wow, that's horrible, right? And you're like, okay, well, no, I won't actually.
Right.
But then it's because it's like, that's not any more winning than any other way the game can go. You're like, well, actually, I don't think I'll do that, right? I think maybe I'll do this a different way. And so you can kind of like take a different approach instead. But it kind of invites you to be like, well, hey, right? Like, what's the, why, what are the stakes and what are the goals here? And I think that to me is what has been so captivating. What I talk about a lot with expressionist design, where frequently in expressionist game design, I try to shift how I think about incentives from saying like an incentive is about getting a player to do a thing that aligns with, like, I think like in a lot of games that have come out in the past, 15, 20 years, it's like, I'm going to give you a Benny every time you like act in character, that kind of model. And for me, what I've been thinking a lot about is it's like, hey, the state is going to give you a Benny every time you align with the state's interests, right? Like that kind of like, it's just shifting it a little bit to that, right? Where it's like, oh, actually the thing that I'm going to incentivize, or like I was reading Sage the Anagogue's Praise the Hawkmoth King, which is the filthiest Powered by the Apocalypse game I've ever read. And in it, you have each of your 4 stats has a guardian. And your stats are boy, girl, thing, and flame. And each of your guardians wants you to be more like that. And so your girl guardian will like give you boons if you act more like a girl, boy guardian, more boons if you act like a boy, thing guardian if you like allow yourself to be passive, and like eroticized, flame guardian if you're more active. So like
after this, we're gonna have to outro, Jay, just so you know.
Oh yeah, totally. So I think there's just a lot of really interesting stuff with like the incentives being less about like, oh, this is an incentive being applied to the player, and more like this is an incentive being applied to the character.
So I do apologize that we went 10 minutes over, but that was just everyone was just rolling. So briefly, Mark, what can people purchase that will keep Magpie afloat?
I mean, that's such a dark way to think about it. Well, let's see. So we released Urban Shadows and Rapscallion this year, and I think both are awesome for completely different reasons. Especially when you think about Rapscallion being a weird fantasy pirate game where you get to go have the adventures you want to have, and Urban Shadows is a terribly sad game of urban politics in which your decisions will be run over by your worst impulses and enemies. So with the whole spectrum, everything, right? So anything you find on the Magpie Games site means a lot to us. It's cheap to say, but we really do mean it. But like it is wild to me that I pay my rent with shit that came out of my head about vampires and werewolves. So thank you to anybody who's ever bought a Magpie game, but especially now, as you might be sort of subtly hinting at a time where it's getting harder and harder to be an artist. So anything you can do to support us does mean a ton to us. Thank you.
And Jay, what would you point people to?
Well, I would ask people to check out Wanderhome if you haven't. Support Possum Creek Games. Support my Patreon, patreon.com/Possum Creek. That's the best way to support me and my thoughts directly. And also keep an eye out for 7-part pack, which is coming out sometime next year. So if you're interested in Wizard Games, that's where to go.
Yeah.
Well, and thank you both so much for being on. It's not an understatement to say that this was absolutely delightful to listen to. Audience, I hope you enjoyed it too. But thank you both so much. Love to have you on anytime you want to come on.
Great, man. Thanks a ton.
Thank you.